Welcome to Cybersecurity Inside. This is our first ever episode of Live from the Green Room. Now, here is your host, Camille Morhardt.
Hi, Cybersecurity Inside presents Live from the Green Room. Join us at leading events for candid, intimate, unscripted conversations with the people who are shaping the future of security. And now, live from the Green Room, I get to have a conversation with all four of the keynote speakers from the Diana Initiative, Alyssa Miller, Suchi Pahi, Steph, and Rin Oliver. First, I'm going to speak with Alyssa Miller, who is Business Information Security Officer at S&P Global. What I loved about the keynote that you gave is that you gave a lot of personal information, sort of your background, your history, your story. And I kind of want to kick it off because I wrote something down that you said. I wanted to ask you more about it. You said cybersecurity isn't just an industry anymore. It's a way of life. And I'm wondering, I mean, you've had quite a career already in cybersecurity. I'm wondering when this shift occurred in your perspective for kind of the rest of the world.
I mean, it definitely wasn't a catastrophic shift, so it's hard to put a date on it, right? I think we've been progressing that way slowly. I think some of the notable events, if you will, or things where we did see some shift was when we started hearing things like, digital transformation, which became this all-encompassing term to describe just the idea of taking things that used to exist in a physical space and turn those into digital assets and digital processes and things that existed in, all these digital systems. And so I think as we continue to do that, and we've learned how to continue to leverage more and more technology, and we continue to innovate with new technology, that just continues on. It's, we now have, smart thermostats that connect to the internet. We've got refrigerators, a lot of things that we even saw coming, like we imagined these in our head, but I don't think anyone really thought of the degree to which digital technology would just be not only a part of our everyday lives, but really kind of responsible for managing our everyday lives.
You talked about serendipity and how earlier in your career you thought, oh, well, I must have been right place, right time. I must have, what wasn't that lucky? And if somebody helped you with something, you thought, well, I couldn't possibly have done it. I wouldn't have done it on my own. It was because of the help. And then as time progressed and you advanced, you realized, boy, am I lucky often. I sure seem to be in the right place at the right time a lot. And as I look around, pretty much everybody who's successful has had quite a bit of help along the way. Maybe what I was thinking, the phrase is kind of like you learn to own your serendipity. And you said, really, it's what you do with it. It's not these moments that really everybody should have. Can you tell us how you make that switch? How can people make that switch a little bit sooner? Because I remember having that same kind of feeling early in the career, and then but it's a slow transformation. How can people jumpstart that?
I think by looking for those opportunities, right? Because of course we'll remember the ones that turned out well, the ones that we recognized and we took advantage of or whatever. But unless you really self-analyze and look back, we don't typically recognize where there was other potential for a lucky break and we didn't react to it. We didn't leverage it. We didn't, make use of that in some way. And so I think just going in with the expectation that lucky breaks are going to be there for you, and maybe we have to stop thinking of them as luck necessarily because of the connotation that brings, almost like it's an undeserved and very poignant and massive event that happens, and just realize that things are going to happen. There are going to be opportunities that are going to occur, and we can turn them into lucky breaks if we take advantage of them. So I think of one in particular. Let me just take that instance, how I moved from a developer role into security. I had a security manager who I'd worked with before came to me, asked me to join her pen test team. And, I'm like, I don't know anything about pen testing. And she kind of talked me into it. And it was one of those moments where I was like, well, you know what? Heck with that. I'm going to take a risk. And it worked out. It was great, right? I mean, that was the launch of what's now a 16-year cybersecurity career. And I think had I, said, you know what, I'm not really interested, whatever, or I'd said, hey, I don't know how to do that, so I don't think I want to do it. If I had turned that down, I wouldn't be sitting here right now recognizing that as a lucky break that I missed. It would just be, well, there was that event I didn't take. Maybe in hindsight, I might look at it and have some regrets about not taking it. But the reality is being willing to jump and take those risks, which is a hard thing to say sometimes because not everybody feels like they're in a position where they can take a certain risk. But it's when you take those and when they work out that then you can look back on and you say, boy, look at that. I actually, I took advantage of a lucky break and it worked out for me. So I think going in expecting as you start your career, just expecting that those types of situations are going to happen and that it can be worth exploring. And sometimes you might have to accept a little more risk in your own personal threat model than maybe you typically would want to.
So let me ask something similar to that, which is you also talked about overwork and how this is kind of a badge in tech, at least for sure. Probably beyond that, it's probably a badge in for almost every job in America, at least. And I can't speak to past that, but how do we balance? And now it's even more. There are no physical boundaries at the moment between work and play, and so I'm wondering, how do you balance, taking those risks, like you say, making sure you're following up with the opportunities, and then not just overdoing it? How do you set boundaries? How do you balance the go for it attitude versus the, I need to take this weekend off, or I need to take my evenings off at a certain time to spend time with my family, or whatever it might be?
Well, let's use that term that you brought up, boundaries, right? You need to be intentional about setting those and understand that at the start of any new venture, that's something you need to be thinking about. What are my boundaries? How far am I willing to go with this before it turns into something that is not going to be enjoyable, or it's not going to be worth the damage that it does? Because let's be honest, things like overwork do create damage. The pandemic has been really good. I hate saying that word, but it's been good. But it has been very enlightening in terms of highlighting just the issues of overwork. I mean, how many companies were shocked to find out when they went to work from home just how much their productivity levels jumped up, to the point that a lot of organizations were looking for ways to make sure that their people weren't allowed to overwork. Right? It kind of flipped the script a little bit. And I think if you're going to take a risk on something, that needs to be part of what you consider is, what is this going to mean in terms of demands on my time? How much of that am I willing to give? And where am I going to set those limits? Walking into my current role as a business information security officer, that was, something that I had to consider. Like, I was going from an individual contributor role up to this really high level. That's a huge jump, right? And I mean, and so it was like, okay, I remember what it was like when I was a leader before, and I was at pretty high levels already. So I know there's going to be an expectation of more of my time. So how do I for me, it was finding those areas in the middle of the day and things. Like, I've been working from home for 9 years. So I'm used to that now of, I'm going to carve out this chunk of the day and go do this. And, if I get up at 6:30 in the morning because I've got a board meeting in Europe, well, then I'm probably going to take some time off during the day, or I'm going to break out early or something. And I'm not going to feel guilty about that. That's the thing, is so often people feel guilty when you take that time to yourself to make up for the time you spent elsewhere. It's like, no, you were up you're on a call at 6:30 in the morning. You're not going to work until 6:30 at night necessarily. Maybe some days you might do that, but that's not going to be sustainable. And you shouldn't feel guilty about carving out 2 hours in the middle of the day then to heck, take a nap even. It doesn't even have to be that you went and did anything in particular. So I think, just being very aware anytime that you make a change, consider what those new boundaries have to look like for you. And that's a very personal decision.
Alyssa, really fascinating talking with you. Really appreciate your time today, and I loved listening to your keynote.
Well, I appreciate it as well. Thanks for having me on. This was wonderful.
Next, I speak with Suchi Pahi, a lawyer and former acting chief privacy officer. She's also worked in nonprofits, tech startups, and law firms with major clients in healthcare and in entertainment industries. Suchi, you are a senior privacy and security lawyer. You used to work you were former acting chief privacy officer for a health technology company, but you've actually had experience in everything from small tech startups to nonprofits to corporate law to law firms that had major healthcare clients and also entertainment clients. So you pretty much have touched on privacy in every form I can imagine.
Almost.
You were acting chief privacy officer, and obviously we had a chief information and security officer panel. Some of the people I think are also privacy officers. Does security and privacy always agree, or are they ever in conflict with each other?
I think they can be in conflict when it comes to assessing risks or where budget spend should happen. And typically they're talking about separate budgets, but sometimes you have company-wide initiatives that need to happen, and maybe privacy would be advocating for it, whereas security is like, that's not really a big problem. We've got the confidentiality, integrity, and availability all sorted out. It's a low risk in terms of being an attack or an exposure surface, so we don't need to worry. Whereas the privacy teams might say, hey, look, that much data is a bunch of liability for us, and we'd rather have this initiative to make it easier to delete or easier to index or something like that. The thing is that even when privacy and security leadership disagree, if they're able to have a conversation and logically lay out their positions and explain why something's important and understand where the other person's coming from, they can typically get to a negotiated solution that nobody likes or that everybody likes. So otherwise you escalate it, and hopefully you have like a responsible and effective escalation chain and no personal feelings get involved there.
Right. So, and I think you had said that you had a structure set up like that in a work environment that you had in the past, where it was a very amicable relationship, but sometimes you disagreed on a professional level and rose that up within the company hire for the final decision. So that's actually leading me into my next question, which you and I chatted about a little bit before, which I think you're alluding to. So let's talk about it. Is why should you care as chief privacy officer or a senior legal counsel at a company? Why should you care if people in cybersecurity are diverse or can represent diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences in the broadest sense? Why does it matter? I mean, cybersecurity is bits and bytes, right? What does that have to do with any other kind of human diversity?
Yeah, I think that's the juxtaposition that doesn't work, right? It's more than bits and bytes. And I'm not the first person and definitely not the last person who'll say this, but diversity has such a direct impact on a user's experience on different tech services or in the products. And having someone with the unique perspective that they have when they're part of a certain minority group makes a big difference. And I'll use an example that a lot of people don't use. So socioeconomics, if you're below a certain level of income growing up, then things will impact you differently. And by things, I mean, how much is a computer that you need to access your school homework? How much is the Wi-Fi? Where do you need to go? And during COVID, I think New York Times had run an article about people driving to the local Starbucks to use the Wi-Fi so their kids would be in the car doing homework off that Wi-Fi. And that's a situation where, if someone had been at the top stakeholder, decision-making point for not necessarily the company in that case, but maybe the government, like, they could have said, hey, look, we're really hamstringing an entire population and really, to put it not so gently, screwing them over in terms of growth and career potential. So.
Yeah, actually, I did have a conversation with Monica Mahay in which she's doing a fellowship right now at Global Fund for Women. Her day job is at Intel as a head, I think, privacy lawyer for EMEA. But she was saying that too, the impact of not having pervasive connectivity and compute worldwide is really, over the last year, caused an even bigger digital divide right now.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then I guess the why I care from my field is, if I'm the privacy lawyer, I need my security and technical experts to tee up the risks that they're finding in their product. And that's frequently overlapping with trust and safety. And trust and safety might not be a separate organization within a company. So that falls into my ambit at that point in time. So I need people I can work with and rely on for having that diversity of opinion.
You seem very relaxed, very confident, very pulled together. And a lot of this conference, we're kind of getting behind that. Everybody's, of course, comes across beautifully, but they're talking a little bit about sometimes some of the struggles that they went through. And I'm just wondering, did you come this way, or is this like a law school training?
It's a little bit of both, I think. My parents, like when I was younger, we moved a lot, and that meant that we were always new schools, always new environments. And I sort of learned to just kind of go with it and really try to adapt as best as possible. And so that's how I ended up this way. And then, of course, being the daughter of immigrants, there were times when, my parents would try to communicate, and they're well educated and speak English and all of that stuff, but there would still be that like language barrier, or I live in Texas and grew up in Texas. So there's just some racism around, hey, we don't want to listen to this accent. So we don't want to listen to you. And there are many times where I was an advocate for my parents, dealing with people many years older than me who were gatekeeping at, the hospital or the school or whatever it was. And I just got to a point where it was, I might be 10 years old, but I'm going to tell you how it is. And that stayed with me for a while. So that's what you're seeing.
Okay, so some of that's the match with becoming a lawyer later. If you have this is kind of out of the gate, you're like, or you have this early in life training, that's actually a good career.
Yeah, it was interesting. Most of the really good lawyers I know have great writing skills, and that's something that a lot of people don't know. So like in my school, one of our high-ranking student attorneys, she graduated. Her bachelor was English literature, and people don't think about that. You don't have to be pre-law. You can be mathematics. As long as you're logical and you can figure out how to write in a clear and concise way, you can be a good lawyer because you're advocating for people on paper, not necessarily in oral arguments.
What advice do you have for people who are interested in doing something around security, but aren't coders? I mean, you obviously went into law and you interact with cybersecurity every day. Sometimes I think, well, if you're not a coder or a developer, then you don't really belong. So can you talk about, even how your diverse perspective, I guess, as a lawyer kind of helps round out the broader deliverables in the field?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I texted a friend, Alyssa Fiola, just a couple days ago, and I said, I always feel like an intruder on InfoSec conferences, even though this is the third, fourth, or fifth one I've been at, because I'm a lawyer and I'm not in technical security. But the reality of it is that to have a well-rounded security function, you have to have people playing every role, and that's compliance and that's legal. And what I really needed to succeed was a sense of curiosity and the comfort level to go ask people that I thought were experts the like dumbest questions you can even think of, which I texted a group of people just yesterday. And I was like, so are containers only Kubernetes? And they were like, we don't really get your question, but here's a great document about containers generally. And I really needed to know that information, and was okay with sounding very dumb.
Well, it's a sign that you're willing to learn, right? You're open to more and probably smart enough to go ahead and ask if you don't know something. Really good to have you on right now. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, delighted. Thank you so much.
Now I'm going to speak with Steph, who's an information security analyst for Duo, part of Cisco. So I just want to remind people, Steph works at Duo, which is part of Cisco, and she actually does security for the company that does security. So she's actually behind the scenes security for who provides security to all of us. So you're the real deal. It's great to have you to chat with. I want to ask you a little bit about burnout, and you talked about it in your keynote a little bit. But one of the things that I have found for myself is I often, when I'm in the middle of it, I don't realize it's happening. It's like, after it's over, I can look back and say, oh my God, that was so taxing. I was so burnt out. I was running on fumes for so long before I got out of that, or the project ended, or I somehow a career shift and you realize how taxing something was. Whereas in the moment, it can sometimes come at you as a positive stress feeling, like, wow, I've got so much to do. This is so important. These deadlines are rolling. And it's almost, I've found energizing in a way in the moment. And how, can you help us understand, how do we recognize that when we're in the middle of it without dampening the highs that come from work that's rolling fast and doing well? And how do we strike a balance during that time?
So sometimes when we're in the middle of a situation, it's really hard for us to zoom out and kind of look objectively on what is normal, healthy behavior and what's not normal and healthy. And something that I've leaned heavily on are my non-tech friends and family, and just talking about what I have going on and hearing their reaction sometimes kind of brings you back to earth of like, oh, it's actually weird that I've been working so much and have not had time to do A, B, and C. I think that has definitely been a very illuminating conversation to have with people. Because I know a lot of us in tech have a lot of friends in tech, and we have a lot of people in tech, and we kind of enable each other's problematic work-life balance problems. So sometimes getting outside of that helps. Also, like really paying attention to yourself and thinking about the last time you've taken a break. I'm fortunate enough that in my current position, every now and again, like my boss and my boss's boss will kind of mention like, hey, it's been a while since anyone's taken any PTO, just letting you know it's there for you to use, it's running out kind of thing, which is like a moment where I check in with myself and say, yes, when is the last time that I've taken PTO and done something for myself and completely unplugged? So I think regularly having a routine of self-care kind of helps circumvent that, and checking in with yourself to see how exhausted you are definitely helps, because you will have moments or weeks where it's busy, you're churning out a project, and that doesn't necessarily lead to a very detrimental case of burnout. So you have those moments, but you should also have the balance of a slow period or a break or rest. And if you know that you're going, and it's been a while since you've taken a break, even if you don't feel tired, just maybe proactively give yourself, it's always better to take the break proactively rather than reacting to, I cannot actually function, so therefore I have to take PTO. So.
Right, that's a good point. So kind of schedule in the break as though that's part of your job, and then assess, when you took that whole day off and, sat by the side of a lake and actually just relaxed, how did you feel after that? Was it like, whoa, I need to do that more? Or was it like, that was it, I'm great now, back at it the next day?
Back to work, yeah, exactly.
It's never going to be a bad thing that you've had that day.
No, I don't think so. I feel like even if people are like, because I have a lot of friends who do a lot, and so when they do have days like that, they feel bad, like, I didn't do anything towards my work or my goals or whatever, but they end up noticing the benefits when they come into the office on Monday, or when they start working on something that it's like, oh, I actually feel a lot more energy towards what I'm doing now than I did before. So it's never a bad idea.
Another thing you got into during your keynote that I'm curious about is you talked about interviewing your interviewer. And, here's the thing, I'm going to add like a timeline concept to that, and I want your input on it, because I don't think I know anybody is my experience, I don't think I know anybody who's in their 40s who doesn't very carefully interview the interviewer. And I think it's, from my perspective, it's because you've been there. You've had at least a couple of experiences, you don't want to find yourself in again. So you're like really careful to ask those questions. And I don't know, by the same token, anybody who's like in their 20s who really does that well, And what I'm wondering, then there's these transition times sort of during your 30s. How can we accelerate that or recognize, move that process forward? Is there a way to jumpstart that or circumnavigate that decade-long process?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I got the advice to be more strategic about applying for jobs, I was definitely well within my 20s. So for me, I think the information came to me sooner. I didn't necessarily have to. I think when you get to your 40s, the reason why it's so quick for you to say, I have to do this, is because of all the experience that you've had. So I think when it gets to your 20s and you listen to other people's experiences, you don't have to necessarily go through that path as well. You can decide, okay, with whatever leverage I have at this point, I want to use that in order to put my best foot forward. That way you don't ever have to get to the point where a big lesson of burnout or some sort of medical issue comes up, and then you adjust and decide, okay, now I'm the prize. I think deciding you're the prize as early as possible is probably better for you in the long run. And then you get a lot of practice in. So by the time you are in your 40s, you're probably, I don't know, I think you kind of speed the timeline out. You maybe in your 40s, you don't even apply. You just kind of show up and say, I would like a job here. I don't know. But I think it gives the opportunity for you to learn a different lesson, rather than every single generation learning the same lesson just by life. And I think that there was a weird thing about that being like a rite of passage, like, oh, you have to earn your time here before you can make those kinds of demands. But I think that things are shifting and changing depending on the landscape, especially with talent shortages that we experience all over the industry. So I think also for you to be the best worker, it's better for you to think about this mindset moving in and probably stay places a lot longer, or build deeper relationships, or have more pleasant experiences by taking this time, rather than paying your dues and suffering all through that.
Right. I don't think there's much benefit to anybody to have a paying your dues scenario. Loving what you do and being great at it is the best. So one final question for you. During your keynote, you talked about, it resonated because I'm familiar with this, and I've lived this at various times, as I'm sure most people listening have. Sometimes your path ends, and it's really got nothing to do with you. There's a reorganization, or somebody who is going to step out of the role ends up not stepping out of the role, or something like that. Right? The job you were applying for, they decide they don't need it anymore, something else changes. In these cases where it's not got anything to do with you, and yet has huge implications for you and what you were planning, how do you really take that next step? Like, how do you figure out what to do next?
So this has actually happened to me on more than one occasion. So I speak from experience when I say this. I always am a huge advocate for expressing your feelings in the moment. So if you feel upset, betrayed, mad, whatever it is, find a way to just process that, because those emotions can be distractions when it comes to deciding what to do next. So get the emotions out, process them as much as you need, and then you can think clearly about what to do that's best for you, and not from a lens of like, I'm pissed, I'm angry, I feel betrayed. But once that's done, I think you kind of just have to make a decision for yourself. I've had to pivot in the moment and decide, is there another avenue for me in the same organization? Is there a way for me to still get to my goals in the same organization? I sometimes have, if I felt comfortable or safe, I brought it to my manager and said, this is what I was hoping for. before, and then this change is complicating that. What is your advice? That's something I've done. But ultimately, if there's nothing to be done in the current company, they made the decision, whatever it was that affected your ability to move up. So you kind of have to make a decision on whether or not you continue there or not. So I think that that's kind of the decision you get to, but I always try to make it work where I'm at because it's just easier that way. And if it doesn't work, I do look elsewhere because at the end of the day, you have to be your biggest advocate. So that's what I would say.
I really enjoyed listening to your keynote, and I extra enjoyed being able to ask you questions just now. So really appreciate it. I'm super excited about this Cybersecurity Inside live from the green room.
Thank you.
And finally, I'm going to meet with Rin Oliver, who's community manager at Camunda. I want to start by asking you, actually, you're a community manager at
technical
Camunda.
Community builder, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
can you
what I
tell
do.
us what that is and what you do there?
Basically, yes. A technical community builder, you can basically, I work under the DevRel team, but I'm actually on the developer experience side. So what I do is basically improve the developer experience through connecting with developers that are working on, for example, community extensions and open source community projects that are extending Camunda. A project that I'm working on right now is actually the Camunda Community Hub. And what it is, it's a centralized hub location for all of our community extensions that are either internally or externally built. A lot of them are external, actually. External community members that have built things that extend Camunda and make our Camunda platform of products better in some way. And that's a centralized location where they all live, and people can come and see those open source projects and have a place where they can go and contribute and see them all in the same place. As of right now, I think there are 108 repos in there. So it's a really cool project, and I'm very, very proud to kick that off. And it's really fun. It's a lot of wonderful people. And some of them are maintained by internal community members, but a large portion of them are actually external people that are they love Camunda and they love what it does, but they decided to make it better in some way. So now their extensions have a home that they can live in, our community hub, where we can spotlight those and say, here's some extensions that new contributors can get started to contribute to open source. And it's not just necessarily written in Java. There's Python, there's Mustache, there's Kotlin, there's a bunch of languages, and there's a lot of ways that people can get started contributing. And they don't even necessarily have to be code. There can be documentation. It's all there. And it's a nice way to highlight that and to really put that focus on open source and getting out there in the community. But a lot of what I do also is developer enablement and making sure that developers have the best experience they can possible when working with Camunda.
And I know one of the things from just kind of looking you up online that you focus on is making sure that the tech community is welcoming to the neurodiverse. And I think that you even said you self-describe as neurodiverse.
I am multiply neurodivergent. I am autistic. I have ADD. I have dyspraxia, and I have dyscalculia. So I have multiple neurodivergence going on there. Yes.
What is the last one? Dyscalculia? What is that?
Dyscalculia. It's actually it's similar to dyslexia, but it's for numbers. And math. You'll switch multiplication and addition signs. You'll switch any sort of mathematical signs. Have difficulty with things such as long division, etc. Doing math on pen and paper, difficult. Doing math in your head, extremely challenging, etc. Things such as, hey, another ADHD or Steph InfoSec. Hey, rock on. Yes. Yay for more neurodivergent individuals in InfoSec. Amazing. I love it.
So how do you make the community more welcoming to neurodivergent developers?
A lot of that, honestly, is giving talks like this, sharing my story, and also I do have a guide sitting out there floating on the internet somewhere about breaking down barriers to open source software contribution for neurodivergent individuals. I've given talks on it at Kubernetes Contributor Summit. I've spoken about neuro-inclusivity as the future of tech with my friend Lena Hack over at the BBC. This is just something that I've been talking about, and it's been something that I've worked on for a long time now. And I also, when I get into a company, I make a very point, words. I make it a point to be very vocal about accommodations. And when I got started at Camunda, I actually made a, here's how to work with me, template for people. It said, this is how I like to communicate. This is what I don't enjoy. This is what you can do to make communicating with me better. This is how I work best in a team. And then it was so well received that actually the whole team made it.
I was just going to say, that sounds like something everybody should do.
It is. Regardless. It's really cool. Yeah. It was really helpful. And it helped people to know that, there's some things that can be challenging. when neurotypical people and neurodivergent people work together on teams, it can be a little challenging at times, but we can get there. And I think that everybody has an opportunity to have their voice be heard. And it's really the thing that I find the most challenging about tech is that there's the interview process is biased for neurodivergent individuals because a lot of us tend to not have filters. So when people say, tell me a little bit about you, they want a very specific about you. They don't want the honest one. They want the interview version.
They want the refined clip.
Yeah, they want the refined version. They don't want the interview. They want the sanitized version, the clean one. And it can be challenging because if you don't answer a question from someone that's neurotypical in an interview the way that they think you should, you get dinged on it. And that's rough because how are you supposed to know that? You go in it thinking, oh, I'm supposed to be honest. Not that honest.
Right.
There's too honest.
So is there, I mean, that seems like it would be a benefit when you're looking at security and vulnerabilities.
Absolutely is a benefit when you're looking at security and vulnerabilities because you have to ask yourself, what is the least level of honesty I can give to you? What is the least level of trust that you get? How much do I trust you? The answer is not a lot. Right. I trust you enough to get what you need to do done and no more.
Right. So it's kind of a natural. Yeah. Is there anything that when you work on a team where you have neurotypical and neurodiverse people both on the team that you think is the hybrid approach is better? Like, is there what is it that gets better when you mix the two?
Oh, gosh. Our team at Camunda, there's a good mix of neurodivergent people and neurotypical people on the DevRel team at Camunda, and I love my coworkers. I love my team. Honestly, wonderful group of people. I am blessed to be a part of that group at Camunda, and when we get together, it's just like they always say, make sure you're not the smartest person in the room. But I also think that it's really cool to be around people that you're all going towards the same goal, but you're doing different things. And it's really neat to just come together and work on stuff and have shared goals, but be working on different projects because everyone can inspire one another. And we all have different strengths and people see things very differently. Neurodivergent people see things differently than neurotypical people. Neurotypical people see things differently than neurodivergent people. And it's when we come together and share those strengths that we really grow together as a company, as an industry, and broad spectrum. Everybody is better when we come together and share ideas and lift one another up. It's like that saying, rising tide.
I suppose if the hackers are coming from both backgrounds, you probably want security researchers to come from both backgrounds.
You definitely do. Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you about a buzzword that's out there that I know Camunda deals with, and that is automation. So I don't want you to answer for Camunda.
Yeah,
I want you to just answer industry kind of wide. But, a lot of people are trying to move into automation. They're kicking off automation projects because that's the thing that we should all be doing right now. So can you tell us what we should look for as we're looking into that? Is this the end all be all? I'm sure you're going to tell me no.
No, it's not. I think it's not. And I think there's a good reason for that. You can and should automate up to a point. If there's a menial task that humans don't necessarily have to do and you think it can be improved by automating it, sure, go ahead and try to automate it. But at the same time, you still should have a fail-safe in there where there's a human that actually looks at that thing at some point, because there has to be that moment where a human checks that and says, okay, this is, that's how we correct for bias. That's how we check to see if you're not like shipping Bitcoin into something or whatever it may be. Like there's no malicious code, et cetera. You can rely on your CI and you can rely on your checks to a certain point, but that shouldn't be the only thing you do. CI check came back green, we're fine, ship it. No, maybe not. Like just because all the checks come back, just because everything's fine, the automation shouldn't be the only thing you trust. You have to trust yourself and you have to trust your team members, and they should be doing their own checks and you should be doing yours before whatever you're making goes out that door. Automation is wonderful, but also there's points where you probably shouldn't.
It's a tool, right?
Yeah, it's a tool. It's not a be all end all. Absolutely.
I think you provided some really good insight today in our conversation just now. Much. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time.
I really appreciate it too. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real joy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. You take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for Cybersecurity Inside. You can find more episodes, including our companion series, What That Means with Camille, wherever you get your podcasts.
The views and opinions expressed are those of the guests and author and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Intel Corporation.